is Andy Ludum. I'm a volunteer here in the research library at the Museum of Ventura County, and one of the fun things I get to do is write and research articles that we make part of the MVC Then blog on our website. And today I'm going to talk about the Prohibition years in Ventura County, which was 1920 through 1933, when the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcohol was illegal in the United States. And the way I illustrated the story, at least to start, was on the opening day of duck season in 1925. And there were dunk hunters on Wainimi Beach. And apparently their gunfire spooked smugglers who were trying to bring in a raft loaded with 130 50-gallon barrels of pure alcohol into the beach. And so barrel after barrel of alcohol started washing up onto the shore. And despite the hunters supposedly keeping watch, locals suddenly arrived and started helping themselves to the barrels of alcohol. And by the time the sheriff got there the next day, they would find tracks in the sand where the barrels had obviously been rolled up into cars or trucks and taken away. The sheriff himself was actually fooled by three men that he knew and considered to be fairly reputable, who came up to him and said, "Gee, the poor sisters at St. John's Hospital don't have enough alcohol to rub down their patients with. Can we have one of the barrels?" And so he did that apparently 3 times, and he only realized that he had been conned once he got the same request from the Mother Superior nun of St. John's Hospital, and she came up asking for alcohol as well. The barrels were finally loaded on a truck and taken to the Ventura County Courthouse, which is City Hall today. And we have a photo in our collection of the sheriff and his men posing in front of the courthouse with the barrels all loaded up in trucks. But by that time, only half the 130 barrels were left. There were only 65, but it was hailed as one of the biggest hauls of illegal alcohol on the West Coast, and it was considered to be a great victory. And today, that alcohol would be worth over $1 million. So $1 million worth of alcohol that was taken, and another $1 million was confiscated by the sheriff. And it kind of illustrates the problem that was associated with Prohibition, which was, while people said they were outwardly supportive of the idea of prohibiting liquor, at least half of Americans wanted to keep drinking, and that same half didn't think the laws applied to them. So Ventura County had a long history with alcohol and temperance. In 1881, Ventura was a town of about 1,300 people. So there are more students right now at Ventura High School than there were in the whole city of Ventura in 1881. But with that small population, they had 17 saloons, and they were almost exclusively patronized by men. And groups such as the Anti-Saloon League and the Women's Christian Temperance Union were very concerned about the terrible impact that alcoholism was having on families. And so they tried almost every year to get saloons banned in various cities in the county. And so finally, in 1903, Ventura County passed an anti-saloon law, but it only applied to the unincorporated parts of the county. In 1906, the city of Santa Paula voted to go dry, and in 1913, after many failures, Ventura actually voted to close all the saloons. Only Oxnard, of the large cities in the county, only Oxnard voted to keep saloons, and that was by an overwhelming margin in 1912. Now, Prohibition began in 1920, in January of 1920, with the adoption of the 18th Amendment. And the 18th Amendment is really interesting, in fact, because it is the first and only time an amendment to the US Constitution actually took away a right. So Prohibition was different in Ventura County than the popular images that you might have of the Roaring Twenties in New York and Chicago with Al Capone and other gangsters and men and women partying in kind of glitzy, high-end speakeasies. Ventura County was isolated and sparsely populated. In 1920, there were only 28,000 people living in Ventura County. So today, Ventura County is 30 times larger than that. So because of its very remoteness, Ventura County was an ideal place for bootleggers to operate illegal stills. A real common place for the bootlegging was Santa Paula, but it was frequently found throughout the county. And there were also 40 miles of secluded beaches and coves on the Ventura County coastline. And it became an ideal place to land liquor from foreign ships that were kind of parked offshore, and then the liquor would be brought on shore, as you heard with the duck hunters, and then it would be rushed to Los Angeles in trucks and cars and all sorts of contraptions. Doctors wrote 400 prescriptions per year. Now this is in our collection. Here's a prescription book for medicinal liquor, and here are a couple of different prescriptions that have been filled out by doctors. They could write 400 of these prescriptions a year, and they did everything. They wrote them for everything from diabetes to cancer to asthma, snake bites, and even old age. Now, I can go along with the old age. You need a drink, right? But it was estimated that writing these prescriptions, many doctors could actually double their annual income. So it was very profitable. Now, one of the most, and look at these bottles. You can see that this is a bottle from the Prohibition era of whiskey, Old Rippy whiskey, but it was produced by the American Medicinal Spirits Company. So, and all of these bottles have markers on here indicating this is medicinal spirits, though it doesn't look at all different than any of the other traditional whiskeys. There's no significant difference between them. Now, one of the most interesting characters during the Prohibition era was a woman by the name of Sally Stanford. She was 18 years old when she arrived in Santa Paula at the start of Prohibition. She was just 2 years out of prison for having used a stolen check to buy an iron. And while she was in prison, she learned bootlegging from her fellow inmates. So she came here and opened a speakeasy, and we don't know exactly where it is, but she described it as a beautiful old Spanish house overlooking the Pacific. And she ran a one-woman business. She'd buy alcohol, pure alcohol in bulk. She'd cut it and flavor it and age it for 48 hours in the bathtub. And she loved the idea of using a bathtub as a mixing location, because she said if the police came, she could pull the plug and all the evidence was flushed out to sea. She bought her raw materials in a place known to bootleggers as the Rincon, and it is in the Rincon area, exactly on the Ventura Santa Barbara County line. And the border was marked on the floor of this building. So if the Ventura County cops came, the bootleggers would all rush over to the Santa Barbara side, and if the Santa Barbara cops came, they would rush over to the Ventura side, and somehow they never got together and did a coordinated raid, but that was another one of the problems. Now, Sally avoided arrest by running a very low-key speakeasy. She made sure that she always closed by 10 p.m. so that neighbors wouldn't rat her out. During the day, she hid the liquor under rose bushes in the backyard. And she eventually married a San Francisco attorney in 1923. She moved, and she used her bootlegging money to open one of the city of San Francisco's most famous bordellos. And that is probably how she was more famous or infamous. And in her later life, Sally Stanford actually became the mayor of Sausalito, which I think is kind of a fun fact. By 1930, there was kind of growing demand for repeal of prohibition. A nationwide poll at that time found that 40% of Americans now favored repeal, and another 30% favored some sort of modification and liberalization of the law. And prohibition and the economy were the key issues in the 1932 presidential election. And to put it in context, the stock market had crashed the year before, so the Great Depression was beginning. Democrat Franklin D. Roosevelt promised repeal, while the incumbent Republican, who was Herbert Hoover, proposed a new, but it was a somewhat vague constitutional amendment on liquor, and nobody liked it on either side. And Roosevelt became the first Democrat in 80 years to win both the popular and electoral vote, so it was an overwhelming victory. And normally conservative Republican Ventura County and California went to the Democrats in the 1932 election. And also statewide, the California law that enforced prohibition was repealed. And the Oxnard Daily Courier had an editorial at the time that said that voters were only interested in one thing, electing Democrats and voting wet. In late 1932, the states were finally presented with the 21st Amendment, and this repealed national prohibition. The 13-year social experiment of prohibition didn't really solve any problems and created new ones. Alcohol, of course, alcoholism was not eradicated. Social patterns just kind of changed and adapted. In the transition from saloons to speakeasies and more liberal locations, men and women now drank together, which they had not done in the past. And home cocktail parties were the rage, and the idea of having a cocktail before dinner became, popular, increasingly popular as the Prohibition era continued. So anyway, thank you for watching this episode of MVC Insider. If you'd like to read more information on Prohibition, you can find the complete story in the MVC Then blog on our website.